guys, it's Sam and welcome to the Get to Know My Taste tag. This is a brand new tag created by myself and Mari from My Name is Mari Nez because I was down there visiting her and we have been lamenting for years, me especially, for probably almost 5 years now, of like, it is so hard to find new content creators. It is so hard to find new booktubers. It's so hard to figure out what people's tastes are because you might go to one video and maybe they're just on a streak where they're reading a bunch of like the same type of book, but that's not really their taste. And so how do I know if I'm going to like what they like? And like, it's like a chore to find new people. And I feel like tags are a way that we used to be able to find new people really easy. And so she was like, we should make a tag like about people getting to know their like bookish taste, basically, like a resource that everyone can search and find a bunch of new booktubers, and not like new to booktubing, just like any booktuber can make this and should, please, everybody do it. And then we will have a playlist. So if you make this, please tag us because we're going to have a playlist so that we can compile all of them. And then everyone has a resource for finding creators that have similar taste to them or a taste that they're trying to look more into, like a different genre or whatever. And those creators can also find their audience. So beneficial to everyone. So we have 15 questions. Let's get into it. Number 1, how do you rate books? Give a quick rundown of how you do your star ratings, or if you don't use star ratings, how you evaluate books. So I've talked about this before, but I generally use the 5-star system. I just think it's the easiest. And I kind of go off of what Goodreads used to say was sort of like their star rating system. Although now these days I don't use Goodreads. I use Storygraph, link down below if you want to follow me there. And I also use a spreadsheet, which can calculate like half stars. So I also consider half stars a thing in my ratings, and quarter stars and stuff like that, because I like to really zero in on the exact thing. 1 star is I did not like it. I don't find anything redeeming about it, and I probably only finished it for a certain reason, like I was hoping it would get better. It was for book club or something. I've gotten way better about DNFing books that I think are going to be like 1 or 2 stars with a few exceptions. So I don't rate books 1 star very often these days. 2 stars is it was mostly bad, but there's some good things about it. So this will typically still show up on my least favorite books of the year, but are usually not like least favorite books of all time. So again, generally bad. I will usually rate books like 2.5 when I truly feel they are right in the middle, because that is completely half of 5, right? So a 2.5 star is a truly right down the middle book for me, where a lot of people consider that a 3 star. That's a 2.5. A 3 star is like, it was fine. It was just like solid. I feel pretty neutrally about it. I don't feel super positive or negative. It's a little bit better than not, generally speaking. It's better than a 2.5, which is right in the middle, but just like fine. Probably not going to make a favorites list. 4 stars end up on favorites lists for me. They are genuinely good books. The only thing that distinguishes a 4-star from a 5-star for me is like a feeling. So a 5-star for me is just, it was like perfect for me in every single capacity. But there can be books that are like really well written, really good characters, whatever, and there just was like a little spice missing from it. And I'm not talking actual spice, just like a little something extra. That makes a 5-star. So 5 stars are like all-time favorites. But a lot of 4 stars are all-time favorites. There's just something missing. Or a 4-star will be something where it's like, it would be a 5, but there's like one little point, like maybe the villain was a little bit too like mustache twirling, or there was something about the plot that I didn't feel like was resolved really well that just hold it back from being a total 5. But 4 and 5 stars are definitely favorites and things I recommend. Number 2, how do you approach reviewing books? What's your review style? Are you analytical, emotional, casual, or structured? From how I talked about the first question, I think you can kind of gather that I'm a mix of a few things. I would say a little bit like structured, and some like emotions. I know a lot of people will be like, if I loved it, 5 stars. That's not me. So not super emotional in that way, but I would say that there's like, I'm mostly structured and a little bit more analytical with some like emotional elements mixed in, because that's what makes my like 5 stars, right? So I do a mix of what I want to see in reviews. So my reviews are pretty structured in that all of my standalone reviews include what I thought about the world building, what I thought about the characters, and what I thought about the plot. Those are the 3 points that I really zero in on. And with plots too, I will also, well, usually plot or world building, it kind of depends on the writer, is usually where I will focus on like the writing. Like, how was the writing style and things. So those are like the 3 points. But then the emotional side of things, I think, would be things that there are some books that are so like for you, right, that I will give extra points to because they are so for me that bump things up from like an emotional level that I totally will say if like, hey, if this isn't your thing, you might not love it as much as I did. But if you really like sentient forests, Hades and Persephone, some of the things that like people that watch me know that I'm really into, then that's that like sort of the emotional aspect of it. And just also the fact that like books and art and everything are supposed to evoke some kind of emotion, and so certain books are going to resonate more with us than others, and I do talk about that in my reviews as well. So not completely analytical, but I would say like 60 to 70% analytical, and then the rest is some of that like emotional piece. Number 3, what's the book that made you a reader? Whether it was your first favorite or the one that got you hooked, what book started it all? I've been a reader my entire life because my dad was a big reader and continues to be, and so I just read a lot as a kid because that was just a part of the like family culture. The book that stands out to me as like my introduction into the reader that I am now would be the Redwall books. I actually have a few of them because I've started collecting them when I see them at thrift stores and stuff, but here's the little original. I want these covers specifically. These are the covers that I grew up with. But Redwall is a children's fantasy series that it's very like typical tropey fantasy series, but instead of it being humans, it's all animals. So there are mice and badgers and ferrets and like all of those like kind of little fantasy creatures. And it's very adorable. There's so many books in this series, and I don't remember a lot of it. I actually should reread these now that I'm collecting them. But why I say that this was like my beginning of like who I am as a reader now is because it follows some of the tropes that I like. It's fantasy. It has like forest kind of setting. It is a very long series. I tend to like really long series. And I would say it was my first introduction kind of into fandom, not in the way that I was like writing Redwall fan fiction or anything like that, but this author, Brian Jacques, who's here on the back, he's a sweet little old man. He has since passed away, but he is someone that I met. It was my first author signing in a media play, if you guys are from the Midwest, and that was my first book signing I ever went to. So I kind of feel like this was the start of like book community. Like I talked to other readers in line. I told him that he was like my favorite author. I had to be like 10, I don't know. And he was like, that's so sweet. I was like, you were such a sweet man. Yeah. So this was, I feel like Redwall, it was like my start, the seeds of what everything has developed into now. Do you have a genre niche? Are there certain genres you gravitate towards, or do you read more widely across genres? I definitely am a genre niche channel. I am primarily a fantasy and sci-fi reader with some romance. So within fantasy, I can go even deeper into like my niches within fantasy. I like gothic fantasy, grimdark, a lot of like forest nature type stuff. Fantasy with a strong romantic subplot, not romantasy. I have yet to find a romantasy book that I really like, but a fantasy book with a strong romantic subplot, love. And I read pretty widely within fantasy. I think the only thing I don't tend to love is like military fantasy. I like political intrigue, but not really like heavy military fantasy. I like own gods and own world religion type stuff, also like reimaginings of mythology and folklore. So yeah, pretty much everything in fantasy. For sci-fi, I tend to stick to space operas and slice of life sci-fi, or like cozy stuff a little bit. I tend to prefer, although I do read a lot of series in sci-fi as well, I tend to prefer standalones in sci-fi a little bit more. But yeah, and I like some of the same things that you would find in fantasy. Do not like military sci-fi and do not like hard sci-fi. My favorite kind of sci-fi would be anything that feels reminiscent of the Mass Effect video game series. And then for romance, I am mostly a contemporary romance reader, and I dip in and out of that. That is my like least read of the genres, although sometimes I will read a little bit more, a little bit less. Emily Henry is someone who every release I read by her, I'm not as like plugged into all the new releases and stuff the way I am with sci-fi and fantasy. Number 5, do you generally prefer character-driven or plot-driven stories? I generally like a mix of both, but if I had to choose one, I would say more character-driven stories, but still with a decent pace. Sometimes something too slow and character-driven can be a little hard for me. Not always. I've definitely liked my fair share of slow character-driven stories. But I like a little bit more of like a medium pace if you're going to be really character driven. But if something is entirely plot driven and I can't have any connection to the characters, I'm probably not going to like it as much. Characters are definitely an important piece for me. But like I said, when I do my reviews, it's world building, characters, and plot. Those are the big 3 for me. Number 6, what's a book you love so much that you don't care if others don't like it? Like, what's one book that you love enough for everyone? I have multiple answers to this, but because I'm sticking to one for the sake of this tag, I'm going to be putting up a separate video talking about my additional answers to some of these questions over on the bibliothecary on my bindery. So if you guys are interested in hearing more answers to some of these questions where we're talking about recommend one book for a certain question, I will have multiple answers over there, linked down below if you are interested. Okay, a book that you love so much and don't care if other people don't like it. That is very easy for me. It is A Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is my favorite book of all time. I have multiple tattoos on my body for books that I love, and this was the very first one that I got. This is one that I'm like, I get that not everyone's gonna love it. I love it. I get that not everyone thinks it's perfect. Some people think it's boring. Some people think it's slow. I love it. Like, it does not, people can make any argument they want about this book, and it's literally not going to piss me off because I'll be like, I don't care. I love it. Where there are other books that if people make arguments about, I'm like, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, this one holds my whole heart, and it could never be dethroned from the pedestal that it's on in my brain. Number 7, other side of the coin. What's a book you love so much that if someone doesn't like it, you know that your reading tastes don't align? The book where a difference of opinion is a strong indicator of different reading preferences. Now, I give people a lot of grace, and generally speaking, if someone doesn't like a book that I love, I'm like, that's literally fine. So this is less books that I'm like, I will hate you if you don't love this, because it speaks so deeply to me on an identity level, which I think some people get into online when they get mad at people for not liking their favorites. This is more like, I think there are so many things about this that I really like and that I think are genuinely good, that if you don't like it at in some level, like if you hate this book, I'm like, yeah, we're not gonna get along, I don't think. I'm looking at my shelf and I'm like, oh, there's a few. But this fits the question, I think, the most. But again, there's more that I want to talk about that kind of fit this category as well for different reasons. So link down below for the bindery post about this. Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. There are so many things that I think are so quintessentially like me and my channel and what I like in this book. It is cozier, but not too cozy. So it's cozy with some more substance. I know some people can get turned off by cozy that's like too cozy and not a lot of plot happens. This definitely has a plot. This has like fairy tale inspirations. It has a gothic twist to it. The character work is really good, and there is a band of characters that I think people tend to really like. There's a family-sister dynamic that is happening. There's a very small romance. There is a magical animal companion, multiple. What else? That's so much. That was like 8 things. And then the writing is just like good because it's T. Kingfisher. If someone were to hate this book, I'm like, I don't think that we're going to have aligned tastes. Like, I don't... Like, you can say this is like a 3-star. This was like a 4 or 5-star for me. Probably a 5-star. You can say this is like a 3-star. That's fine. But if you say this is a 2 or a 1, I'm like, we're not going to have the same taste, babes. Like, there's just so many things about this that I really like. And that I, again, like in other books, that if you don't like those things, you're probably not going to like my recommendations a ton. Number 8, what's in your trash pocket? This is a phrase that Maddie and I believe Nicole like came up with, or they use a lot, and we've also taken it kind of in our friend group. But trash pocket is like, what books, tropes, or themes do you know are bad, but you love them anyway? For me, this is definitely like urban fantasy or like paranormal romance. I, in like high school, late high school and college, read a lot of like paranormal romance, urban fantasy. And I've talked about this at length. Laurel K. Hamilton raised me. I read like all of the Anita Blake books up to what was out at the time. I think I've only read like 20 or whatever. And although those devolve into mostly erotica at a certain point, which is not something I'm a huge fan of, I'm not a big like smut reader, I love those books. I skip those parts. I like an urban fantasy, and I like a paranormal romance in a lot of ways, even though those genres, and they've gotten better, but they tend to be pretty problematic with the tropes, the alpha males, the like using sexual assault as a plot point a lot. Heavy involvement with the police in some ways. That trails off in the Anita books, but Anita starts off being like working with the police a little bit. There's just like certain tropes, like the sort of headstrong, strong female character kind of stuff. Like a lot of the pack dynamics, because there tends to be a lot of shapeshifters, is like a problem. There's things about it, right, that if you had them in a normal fantasy book, I'd be like, but if you give it to me in an urban, like paranormal series, I'm like, yum, 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 yum. Like, I just love it. I just love it. There's good stuff, though. So I do think parts of the Laurel K. Hamilton series are really good. And then, like, the Kate Daniels series by Alana Andrews. Solid. Good. But yeah, those are things that I know are pretty niche and not everyone's going to love, but urban fantasy's firmly in my trash pocket. Number 9, do you have any deal breakers in books? Something that, if present, immediately turns you off from a book. I think the biggest glaring one is accidental pregnancy, or even like on-purpose pregnancy, to be completely honest. It's just not something I really want to read about in any book, whether it's contemporary, like the accidental pregnancy pops up as like a contemporary romance, like plot line, right? But even in like fantasy or sci-fi, like usually something so catastrophic is happening, like world ending or wars or whatever, that I'm like, no babies. Like I don't I'm not anti-children. It's just like in books, I'm like, no, 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 that's a lot. No, thank you. So yeah, pregnancy tropes in books are a big no-no for me. But I have more deal breakers than this. So other video down below. Because I started recording more, actually. And I was like, no, it's supposed to be just one. It's supposed to keep this short and sweet because this is going to be a long tag already. But there are more. Number 10, what's a strong opinion you have about a book released within the last year? Whether it's overrated, underrated, or just a take you need to share. I feel like I so don't keep up with book releases as much. And maybe that's my hot take. I do and I don't. So I definitely like pay attention to some of the big releases, whatever. Not as much as I used to, but I do tend to read a lot of backlist. I'm at a point in my life where I want things to be like vetted before I'm reading them. I don't want to be in that first chain necessarily of people like reading and seeing if these things are hyped or not or whatever, or like riding the hype wave. Oh, what I will say, because this will be something about taste and if it aligns, Fourth Wing, entirely overrated. That whole series, entirely overrated. If you are a Fourth Wing lover, I have a lot of friends that love Fourth Wing. It's okay, I guess, for you to like it. But if that is like your pinnacle of fantasy, we're also not going to get along. So yeah, Fourth Wing, I read the first one. It was like a 2. And yeah, I do think that is really overrated. And just romantasy as a genre is really overrated too. I want to like it. It should be perfect for me because I love a strong romantic subplot. They have not yet found the science to combine these two genres in a way that is effective for me. 11, what do you look for in writing? What makes a book stand out to you? Is it prose style, themes, voice, structure, or something else? So this would be the little like extra, I would say, that tops it off for me. I would say the writing quality is definitely something that I notice, and I'm not always able to verbalize like what about it is so good. Obviously, like a flowery prose, like purple prose, very heavily metaphor, like all of that kind of stuff is very pretty, like a Laini Taylor or whatever. That I can usually pinpoint, and I really like that, but I don't need that in my stories. But I think effectively conveying the emotions with, honestly, sometimes as little words as possible. Like, that's what I really like about Erin Morgenstern, and not everyone does. But what I feel Erin Morgenstern stories do is she conveys character and character interactions and character feelings and all the interpersonal stuff in a very short amount of time. Like, and a lot of people are like, oh, her books are all vibes. And they are very vibey, and I like a really vibey book. But she is able to do that really concisely, I think, but in a way that like evokes a lot of emotion in me, at least. So I think that kind of style I really like, and just prose that like just it has a vibe to it. Like I really like authors that have a voice that you can really sort of tell that's that author. So like an Erin Morgenstern, a Roshni Chokshi, Catherine Arden, even Naomi Novik a little bit will be this way. N.K. Jemisin, some of those I really like. So yeah, and I really like a theme heavy book and a vibe heavy book. So I like settings that are very vibey, a lot of like forest, that kind of stuff. Anything that evokes like, or I can really picture the setting very well. And I really like a really cool theme. I like a lot of political intrigue type stuff, or just anything that really effectively does its themes well. Like it's not even like it necessarily has to be a certain theme, but if it like really is saying something with its themes, I tend to really like that. Number 12, how do you decide what to read next? Do you plan ahead, mood read, or follow external factors like hype, recommendations, and arcs? Generally speaking, it's mood reading, but I also like will pick things up or buy things to have on my shelf, or actually I don't tend to buy a lot of books, I tend to get them as gifts, but like I add them to a wish list or something because of a recommendation that's repeated. So like I mentioned, I tend to read mostly backlist books, and so it's like if a book has been repeatedly recommended by a reviewer or like a bunch of reviewers that I trust, or it keeps coming up and I hear about the synopsis and I'm like, ooh, that sounds good, then I will that'll be something that goes on my shelf. I do follow a little bit of the release schedule of just like reading synopses and being like, oh, that sounds good, and a lot of like repeat authors. Like if I know I like a certain author, I'm going to probably pay attention to their next release. But as far as what I'm going to read next in line for things and like stuff kind of planning out my TBR or whatever, it is mostly mood reading, but I could probably tell you with pretty good accuracy like the next like 3 books or so that I'll read just based on like mood. But I do tend to, just being like, what's the vibe of what I want next? And usually I'll want to vary it up a little bit. So like, for example, the other day I finished a historical romance, which I don't tend to read a lot, but I do still like. That will pop in sometimes. But I finished a historical romance, and there was a contemporary romance that was on my Kindle that I was going to read, but I was like, no, I need like a little bit of a break from romance. So I switched to a sci-fi book, is what I'm reading currently. I won't always do that between fantasy books, but I will want the fantasy books to feel like a little bit different. So like, I won't tend to read like a sort of epic fantasy back to back, or like a really thick, chunky book back to back, because I feel like I'm gonna get bogged down in it, you know? So I do want some variety of my favorites that I know I like. 13, where do you get inspiration for your booktube content? What sparks your video ideas, other creators, trends, personal reading experiences? And Mari and I were actually talking about this when I was down there. I really find a lot of creative juice from being around other people, or talking to other people, or watching other people's content in booktube. And I would say my most like involved in the community was when I was following like a lot of booktubers, which is part of what sprung this tag up. Is I feel like a lot of the people that I used to follow have left, moved on from booktube, and it's so hard to find new people from just what I talked about at the beginning of the video, of having to like really comb through a lot of stuff to kind of feel like get this person's taste. So yeah, I feel like having community is important. Being around other people that make content. When Mari and I get together, we end up kind of rapid fire talking about a lot of different like content things, inspire each other to read. That's why we created BookNet Fest, because that was also like a community thing. So yeah, being around other people who really enjoy books really motivates me. I wouldn't say I necessarily get like one-to-one inspiration from other people's videos. Like, oh, someone did this video and then I wanted to do it. It definitely happens, but it's just more so like being immersed in the talking about it. And then the rest of it is more like personal experiences. Like, oh, I've noticed I've been really getting into this genre more, so I'll make a video about that. Or I've noticed this trend in publishing, so I'll make a video about that. Or people are kind of generally, again, community-wise, talking about a certain topic. I also want to talk about my opinions on that topic, kind of thing. So I would say that is like personal experience from being within community is where a lot of my inspiration comes from for content. 14, if you could make any book go viral right now, what would it be? A book you think deserves more attention, and why? Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. This is a book that's so like me in a lot of ways, but I've also recommended it to a number of people and all of them have loved it. So I think more people should read it. This speaks to me in a similar way of like Erin Morgenstern's books. I think the writing is very beautiful and evokes a lot of feeling even when it doesn't need to be like necessarily very long. This is a story that follows the descendants of Baba Yaga, like the famous witch from Slavic folklore, and they inherit her house on chicken legs, which is called Thistlefoot in this story. And there is stuff about that family that is very magical, and the brother and the sister have been kind of like estranged for a while. They're adults, they've been estranged for a while, and the brother's like, I will let you take the house in its entirety, because the sisters like fall in love with this house, if you take it on the road one more time, because they used to be part of a family that was like a traveling like troupe of performers. And so there's some stuff around the performance and like sort of like puppeteer performance, and the way that like their magic has manifested and stuff like that. And then there's also this like antagonist that keeps following them that is essentially riling up aggression, like racism, xenophobia, whatever, in people around. And so it's this like story of sort of like generational trauma, because Baba Yaga and her family in this are also culturally Jewish. So you have what's currently happening, you have this like following some of this antagonist, and then you also have flashbacks from Thistlefoot's perspective of like Baba Yaga's story and history of like, is this a myth? Is this history? And it also follows some like of the Jewish like programs in Eastern Europe. It is so good. So it's like, it's heavy, and there's obviously some like historical heaviness to it, but it has that fantasy element. It has a lot of like family stuff, family trauma. It's queer. Again, the house being sentient, and so like a sentient house story. There's so much. I'm like truly shocked that this book isn't more popular than it is. I know that it has like niche popularity, but if I could make anything go viral, it would be this. And lastly, number 15, who are some booktubers with reading tastes similar to yours? This is why I made this tag, because there are so few of them left. I can make an entire list of people that I used to follow that I got so many recommendations from that I think have really similar reading taste to me. RIP. They're not dead. Their channels are dead. But I would say Angela from Literary Science Alliance, her and I have some like similar overlaps and things. Emma from Emma Skies recently came over from TikTok, and I think her and I have some like similar reading taste. I keep thinking of names of people that are gone. I'm not going to keep digging through my memory of people that I follow, because again, it's like so few. A lot of people that I follow also don't share my complete same taste. So I'm trying to, for this question, recommend people that have similar taste to me. But there's plenty of really good booktubers who don't really have my same taste that I really enjoy. But the whole point of this tag is to get more people to do it. So we have one more to go for all of us to find people who like match our taste, or who have a genre taste that we don't know about yet and want to get into more or whatever. So please, if you make content, please do this tag. And if you don't have to be new to booktube, I'm obviously not 10 years into booktube. OG booktubers, all of you need to do it. People who have like 500,000, you need to do it. If you've been making content for a while, if you haven't been making content for a while, like please do this so that more like we have a whole compilation of videos that people can look and search for and help find you. This is helpful for everyone. It's helpful for the community and the audiences, and it's also helpful for the creators because more people can find you that might like your stuff. If you do this, please tag myself or Madi so that we can put it in the playlist. I'm pointing over here because my computer's over here. You know, message us on Threads or Blue Sky or specifically on YouTube or whatever, like tag us so that it pops up for us, or drop it in the comments down below so that we see it and it can go in the giant playlist as well. Comment below and also tag some creators down below that you want to see do this tag. Work smarter, not harder. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.